Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, lying on a thin bed made of clay and straw, with absolutely no modern comforts around you. There's no soft mattress, no pillows to rest your head on, just the gritty reality of the ancient world. The heat of the desert begins to seep into your skin even before the sun rises. The air is thick, heavy, dry, and your whole body feels it, from the soles of your feet to the crown of your head. Every time you move, the sand shifts, and with it comes the oppressive heat of the desert. The temperature's already unbearable, and it's still early in the morning. But the strangest thing, the silence. The quiet is deafening, almost suffocating. You might be thinking of Egypt's grand monuments and majestic pyramids, but in this moment, there is no grandeur. There's only the sound of distant hammers and chisels, echoing across the open desert like a constant, unyielding rhythm. The soundtrack of endless back-breaking labor. In the dead of night, the workers toil without rest. You realize this is no dream. This is survival. The smell, though, that's what really hits you. It's the first thing that cuts through the air. Not the fresh, sweet fragrance of the Nile or the pleasant scent of blooming flowers. No. Instead, it's a nauseating mix of decaying meat, stale bread, and sour beer that lingers heavily in the atmosphere, choking you with its presence. It's everywhere. In the marketplace, the workers' quarters, even the temples. You can't escape it. It's the very essence of the place. You might think that the ancient Egyptians were a sophisticated civilization. After all, they built some of the most impressive monuments in history. But as you lie there in the suffocating heat, struggling to breathe, you realize how wrong that assumption is. The Egypt that most people romanticize is far removed from the grim reality of daily life for most of its people. The pyramids, the grand temples, they weren't built by those who lived in luxury. They were built by the hands of the poor, the downtrodden, the desperate. And you? You'd be just another cog in the wheel, another worker grinding away in the desert. Now, take a deep breath and imagine yourself in that world. Imagine waking up in a place where comfort doesn't exist, where every day is about surviving the elements, fighting off disease, and scraping by with what little you have. The bread? Well, it's not exactly the kind of food you're used to. It's gritty, coarse, and more likely to give you a sore stomach than fill you up. You might think you'd be fine, but that's the first mistake you'd make. The bread, the one thing you'd rely on to get through your day, would be your downfall. You see, in ancient Egypt, that humble loaf of bread was often laced with sand, and eating it was no better than chewing on stones. You thought it was your sustenance? It would be your torment. So think about it for a moment. Your life today, with all the comforts you've come to expect, your soft pillows, your air conditioning, your fresh, clean food, that would be a luxury beyond imagination in this world. In the land of the pharaohs, life wasn't about pleasure or ease. It was a fight for survival, and if you were transported there, you wouldn't last long. The heat, the constant back-breaking labor, the sand-filled bread, it would all conspire against you. This isn't some holiday you're signing up for. This is reality, harsh, unforgiving, and merciless. In ancient Egypt, you'd be pushed to your limits every single day. And the worst part? You wouldn't have the luxury of choosing your fate. You'd just have to survive or perish. But how long would you survive? That's the real question. And trust me, even if you made it through the first few days, the odds aren't in your favor. Now imagine yourself stepping out into this world. The sun has just started to peek over the horizon, casting a harsh, blinding light over the landscape. There's no cool breeze here, no fresh morning dew. The heat is already searing, and every step you take leaves you sinking into the fine, scorching sand. You're already thirsty, and you haven't even made it out of your tent yet. You feel the sweat beginning to beat on your forehead, the weight of the oppressive desert air making every breath feel heavy. It's as though the air itself is pushing down on you, suffocating you. You take a few more steps, squinting against the unrelenting sun, and make your way towards the market. This isn't the kind of market you've seen in modern times. There are no neatly stacked fruits, no pristine shelves of goods. This market is a battleground. It's a place of desperation, where the poor scramble for scraps of food and drink. The stalls are overcrowded with people, some of them in rags, others in torn, sun-bleached linen. But one thing's for sure, no one looks happy. There's No joy here, only survival. The bread, the one thing you thought might be a comfort, is already laid out in front of you. You approach, your stomach growling in anticipation. You've worked hard all day and the idea of a meal is all that keeps you going. You pick up a loaf, thinking it'll be your salvation, the thing that will keep you going until nightfall. But when you bite into it, you immediately know something is wrong. The bread is not soft, it's not fresh. Instead, it's gritty. It's rough. You feel the crunch in your mouth, and then you realize there's sand in your food. It's not just a little grain of sand, it's like chewing on dirt. The very thing you relied on to fill your stomach, to give you energy, is filled with what feels like tiny shards of stone. You try to swallow, but it's hard. The grainy texture of the bread makes it feel like you're eating something unnatural. You feel sick. The more you chew, the more the sand scrapes against the inside of your mouth and you realize just how bad the situation is. But you don't have a choice. You've got no other food. This bread, though it's filled with grit, is your only hope to get through the day. And so you keep eating, each bite feeling like a punishment. You force it down, your stomach turning, but you keep going. You can't afford to stop. The work is relentless. And the moment you finish eating, you feel the effects, the bloating, the discomfort in your stomach, and the heaviness that fills your chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. Food was meant to nourish you. But in ancient Egypt, food often meant pain. The bread that was supposed to fuel your body is now weighing you down, hurting you. As you continue walking through the marketplace, the realization sets in. There's no escape. This is the life you've been thrown into. The bread with sand, the constant thirst, the unbearable heat. This is your new reality. And there's no way out. You can't run away. You can't escape the fact that every day will be a struggle to survive. In this world, there's no room for weakness. You either adapt or you perish. In ancient Egypt, the luxury of living to a ripe old age was reserved for only the most fortunate or those of higher status. For the majority, life expectancy was tragically low. If you made it past childhood, and many didn't, you could be considered lucky. On average, most people in ancient Egypt didn't live past 30 years of age. Let that sink in for a moment. Just 30 years. You might think that 30 sounds like a decent amount of time, but that's not accounting for the constant threats of disease, malnutrition, and harsh working conditions. You wouldn't reach that age and enjoy your retirement or a peaceful life. No, your 30 years would be filled with suffering. The odds of surviving infancy were low. Many children didn't make it to their first birthday. If you did survive, to adulthood, the risk of dying from disease or accidents was overwhelming. Now imagine your own life, but with the constant looming threat that you might not see tomorrow. You wake up every day to a world where survival is never guaranteed. You don't take your health for granted. You don't even take tomorrow for granted. Everything you do, every step you take, could be the difference between life and death. Quick scratch or a minor injury could lead to a fatal infection. With no antibiotics, no pain relief, no medical understanding of germs, a simple cut could get infected and become life-threatening. If you got sick, there wasn't much you could do about it. You could pray to the gods, but more often than not, you'd end up relying on the same unsanitary water sources and poorly prepared food that were slowly killing you. It's hard to imagine living a life where every day feels like it could be your last. But that was the reality for most of the people in ancient Egypt. Let's talk about disease. You might think that diseases only affect people in far-off primitive times, but in reality, the people of ancient Egypt were constantly battling illness. Without modern medicine, every day presented new dangers. The major threats were illnesses we still face today, but with none of the life-saving treatments we now rely on. Malaria was a common affliction, spread by mosquitoes. The warmth and humidity of Egypt, especially around the Nile, made it a breeding ground for the mosquitoes that carried the disease. Malaria could wipe out entire communities if it spread unchecked. There were no anti-malarial drugs to treat the sick. Instead, people had to rely on herbal remedies and sheer luck. And those remedies weren't always effective. Many died from the disease, their bodies succumbing to fever and exhaustion. Tuberculosis, too, was rampant. This bacterial infection spread through the air, passed on by coughing and sneezing. In a society with limited hygiene practices and overcrowded living, conditions tuberculosis spread quickly, claiming the lives of countless individuals. People would begin to cough up blood, their lungs deteriorating until there was nothing left to sustain them. It was a slow and agonizing death. And let's not forget the less talked about diseases. Dysentery was widespread, particularly in rural areas. The water wasn't filtered, and the food wasn't always safe. Contaminated food and water sources spread deadly diseases that caused diarrhea and dehydration. People would die from a condition that was treatable today with a simple dose of antibiotics and oral rehydration salts. Back then, if you were unlucky enough to contract dysentery, the chances of survival were slim. But it wasn't just the obvious diseases that were a threat. There were also parasites, tiny unseen creatures that invaded the human body through unsanitary food and water. These parasites could make a person's life miserable, sapping their energy, causing stomach pain, and making it difficult to function. The parasitic infections in ancient Egypt were a major source of suffering for the population, yet they were invisible to the naked eye. You can't ignore the psychological toll either. People didn't know what caused diseases, and so they feared the unknown. It wasn't just physical illness they were dealing with. It was the mental strain of never knowing if the next illness would be fatal. And the worst part? There were no cures. There were no vaccines, no doctors trained in sanitation or infectious diseases. The people of ancient Egypt were at the mercy of their environment, and it was an environment that didn't care whether they lived or died. Now let's talk about hygiene, or the lack thereof. In ancient Egypt, personal hygiene wasn't exactly a priority. The concept of regular bathing was foreign to most. The rich and powerful may have had access to scented oils and perfumes to mask their body odor, but the majority of people? Well, they did their best with what they had. Bathing wasn't a daily activity. In fact, it was often considered unnecessary. The Egyptians did have access to the Nile River, which provided a natural source of water. But the river wasn't just used for drinking and bathing. It was also the main source of waste disposal. People didn't have toilets in the way we think of them today. There were no plumbing systems, no sanitation workers to clear out the waste. The river, which was vital for their survival, also became a cesspool for disease. Imagine the stench of the streets. The marketplace wasn't filled with the smells of fresh fruit or baking bread, but rather the stench of sweat, urine, and rotting waste. People would try to cover the smell with incense and perfumes, but there was only so much you could do. The air was thick with it, clinging to everything. The workers who built the pyramids and temples, they would have lived in these conditions, fighting not just the heat and the hard labor, but also the constant risk of disease from the filthy environment. And the worst part? The river that sustained them was also where they bathed. You couldn't avoid it. It was there, right in front of you. The same water that you used to wash yourself and your clothes was also the water that carried diseases and parasites. You were essentially forced to bathe in filth, the dirt of the land mixing with the human waste. It's almost impossible to imagine what it would have been like to live in those conditions. To be surrounded by illness, to drink contaminated water, to have no means of escaping the inevitable suffering. At the heart of the Egyptian diet was bread. It was the staple food. In a world where food was scarce and resources were limited, bread was a symbol of survival. But, as with so many things in ancient Egypt, the bread wasn't always as it seemed. Most of the time, the bread wasn't made from the finest grains. It was coarse, gritty, and often mixed with sand. This wasn't just a little sprinkle of sand either. It was a significant amount. It was the kind of thing that would make you think twice before taking a bite, but there was no choice. The grain wasn't cleaned properly before it was ground into flour. The result? Pockets of gritty sand mixed in with the bread, making every bite a chore. People ate it because they had to. They didn't have the luxury of choosing their food or having the luxury of fresh, clean ingredients. If you wanted to survive, you ate what you were given, even if it meant eating bread full of dirt. Eating this gritty, sandy bread was an experience most people would never forget. It wasn't like eating soft, fluffy loaves made with care and quality ingredients. No, this bread was a survival food, one that would eventually take a toll on your stomach and your health. It would scratch your throat and make you feel uncomfortable. But if you didn't eat it, you'd starve. And that was a far worse fate. The bread wasn't the only food available, but it was the most common. When you couldn't afford meat or vegetables, Bread was what kept you going. It was cheap and filling, but it was also a reminder of how harsh life was. It wasn't meant to be enjoyable. It was a means of survival. Picture yourself now as a worker on the Grand Pyramids, one of the thousands of anonymous souls who spent their entire existence building monuments that would eventually outlast them. You're part of a massive workforce that toils endlessly under the hot Egyptian sun. Your day begins before dawn, the heat already creeping into your bones as you grab your tools and head to the site. There is no rest for you, no time for leisure. You work from sunrise to sunset, lifting stones that weigh as much as a small car, positioning them with precision to form what will one day become the Great Pyramids. You've been given a small ration of bread to fuel you for the day. It's rough, dry, and heavy. The bread, which should be the sustenance you need to keep going, is instead a burden. It's filled with sand, gritty and unpleasant to the taste. But you don't have a choice. There's nothing else to eat. If you don't eat this bread, you won't have the strength to work. You take a bite, but immediately, your mouth fills with the coarse, crunching texture of sand. It's painful to swallow. Every time you chew, it feels like you're eating rocks. Your stomach protests, but there's no time to complain. The day stretches out ahead of you and you must keep moving, keep working. Your body aches with exhaustion as you continue hauling stone after stone. The sun beats down relentlessly, making the air shimmer with heat. The hunger gnaws at you, but it's the heat that is the real killer. You are drenched in sweat, covered in dirt. But the worst part is the overwhelming sense that you are nothing more than a cog in a machine. You are disposable. You are part of the countless workforce that is building these monuments, yet you will never be remembered. As the hours drag on, you begin to feel the effects of the bread. The sand inside your stomach starts to churn, making you feel bloated, nauseous. Your mouth dries out, and the sweat mixes with the dust on your skin, creating a grimy film that sticks to you like a second layer. But you don't stop. You keep working, because if you stop, someone will punish you. The overseers are harsh, and the punishment for stopping could be severe. You keep lifting the stones one after the other as the heat presses in on you, making it harder to breathe. By the time the sun begins to set, you can barely stand. Your legs are shaking, and your back aches from hours of lifting heavy stones. But there's no reward at the end of the day, no rest, no hot meal, just more bread filled with sand, and more of the same tomorrow. That night, you lie down in a crude shelter made of palm branches, too tired to think about anything except sleep. You can't even close your eyes without feeling the pain in your muscles and the nausea in your stomach. You drift off, and in your dreams, the pyramid stands before you, a symbol of the labor and sweat you and so many others have poured into it. But you realize, in that moment, the pyramid will outlast you. You will be forgotten, your name lost to the sands of time. But the pyramid? It will remain, long after your bones have turned to dust. In another part of Egypt, the powerful priests of the temples are enjoying their own version of abundance. These men, who claim to be closest to the gods, live lives of relative luxury compared to the workers. They have food, wine, and entertainment, and their lives are devoted to maintaining the favor of the gods. But their lives aren't as perfect as they seem. One priest, after a long period of fasting, is invited to a grand feast at the temple. The food is lavish, spread out before him, roasted meats, fruits, and of course, the bread. But as he digs into his meal, something feels off. The bread is harder than usual and it tastes stale. Something's not right. The meats are rank, not cooked properly, and the fruits seem overripe. He doesn't want to be ungrateful, so he eats anyway, forced to swallow the food despite the discomfort in his stomach. The next morning, he wakes with a fever, feeling a dull ache in his bones. The discomfort soon turns into agony as his stomach churns. He can't keep anything down. The food he ate at the banquet, the food that was supposed to be the finest, is making him sick. He begins vomiting violently, and with every heave he can feel the weakness creeping through his body. He's too proud to admit it, but he knows that something isn't right. The food has poisoned him. The priest is bedridden for days. His once proud body, now frail and weak, succumbs to a mysterious illness that could have been prevented with proper care and food safety. But in ancient Egypt, this kind of negligence was common. There were no health regulations, no sanitation rules to prevent spoiled food. The priest, who had once stood before the gods, had been struck down by something as simple as bad bread and rotten meat. His body, weakened by disease, eventually gives out, and he dies, a victim of something that could have been avoided in a world that understood the basics of food safety. His death is quietly mourned by those who knew him, but soon he is forgotten. His name, his legacy, all vanish into the dust, and the priests who remain continue their work, as though nothing has happened, blissfully unaware that the same fate could befall them tomorrow. Life in ancient Egypt wasn't easy for adults, but it was even worse for children. The high infant mortality rate meant that many never saw their 10th birthday. They were born into a world of sickness, poverty, and early death. One such child, barely 6 years old, has never known anything but hardship. Her family lives in a small, overcrowded hut on the outskirts of the city. The air is thick with dust, and the water they drink comes from a well that is often contaminated. One day, the child begins to feel ill. At first, it's just a mild fever, something the parents brush off as a common childhood ailment. But soon, the fever spikes, and the child is writhing in pain. She begins vomiting, and her body grows weak. Her parents, desperate, take her to the healer, but they have no money to pay for proper medicine. The healer does what he can, but his methods are outdated and ineffective. He offers some herbs, some prayers to the gods, and tells the parents to wait. But they know deep down that this is more than a simple fever. The child's condition worsens. Her parents watch helplessly as she slips further into unconsciousness. In the end, she dies, another victim of disease, another casualty of a world where healthcare is primitive and often inaccessible to the poor. Her parents bury her with a sadness that is too deep for words, but they know that in this harsh, unforgiving world, their child's death was almost inevitable. No one remembers her name. No one will ever know her story. She was just another child, lost to the ancient world's inability to protect its young. The gods, it seems, were silent on her behalf. As the day wears on, you're one of the many workers who has been toiling under the blazing Egyptian sun. The work has been endless. Hours of hauling stones, mixing mortar, and lifting heavy weights. You're used to the exhaustion, but today something feels different. Your body feels heavier, your movements slower. The sand underfoot is burning, your skin, and the heat is unbearable. You wipe the sweat from your brow, but it only makes the grime stick to your face even more. Your muscles ache and your throat is dry, but you continue. You've worked this hard before, but this time it's different. This time, you feel like you might not make it. The overseers shout orders, pushing you to keep going, but your legs won't cooperate. Your vision blurs, and your head starts spinning. You feel dizzy, like the world is tilting around you. The last thing you hear before you collapse is the sound of your fellow workers grumbling, the overseers yelling at you to get back up. But it's too late. You hit the ground, your body too weak to continue. The rest of the workers keep going. They can't afford to stop. And so, you're left behind. The overseers don't care. If you die, there's always another person to replace. You've become another nameless body in the desert, a casualty of a system that doesn't value life, only labor. Now take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine the contrast. The life you've just experienced is harsh, unyielding, and unforgiving. But now picture yourself lying in your own bed, a soft mattress beneath you, the cool air of the night brushing across your face. You're no longer in the sweltering heat of Egypt. Instead, you're surrounded by comfort, a warm room, fresh air, clean sheets, and a fridge full of food. In this moment, think about the simple luxuries you take for granted. A warm shower, a cool drink, a safe place to sleep. You might feel that the struggles of your own life are overwhelming at times, but they are nothing compared to the endless hardships faced by those in ancient Egypt. The people who lived in that brutal world didn't have the luxury of a comfortable bed, running water, or clean food. They were fighting for survival every single day. The truth is, the life we live today is a privilege. We are protected by medicine, technology, and infrastructure. We have the luxury of time. But the people of ancient Egypt were caught in a relentless battle. They had no choice but to work until they dropped, eat whatever was available, and accept the suffering that came with their harsh reality. Let's take a step back and think about the world we live in today. The luxuries we often overlook. You wake up in the morning, and for most of us, the first thing we do is check our phones, make ourselves a cup of coffee, maybe take a quick shower. Our homes are full of comforts: running water, electricity, soft beds, and most importantly, a sense of safety. The basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing are met without much thought or effort on our part. But what if you didn't have any of these luxuries? What if you didn't have a comfortable bed or a warm shower at the end of a long day? Imagine waking up in a place where every breath is thick with dust, every meal is a gamble, and the very land beneath your feet is constantly trying to swallow you whole. This was the reality for the people of ancient Egypt, and in many ways, their survival was an incredible feat. When you think about it, the fact that the Egyptians managed to build such monumental structures, create such an advanced society, and maintain a civilization for thousands of years, it's nothing short of miraculous. But at what cost? They endured unimaginable hardships, and in return, they built monuments that would stand the test of time, monuments that would one day be admired by generations far removed from their own suffering. And yet, they didn't have the luxury of looking at these monuments with pride. For them, the pyramids and temples weren't just symbols of power and grandeur. They were their prison, their constant reminder that their lives were spent in servitude. They worked their entire lives to build these massive structures, and many never even saw the fruits of their labor. For most, survival wasn't about seeking happiness or comfort. It was about enduring the brutal conditions of the environment. You ate, worked, and fought to stay alive. There was no time for dreams of a better life, no time to wish for something greater. The struggle for survival consumed everything. So, when you think about your own life, about the daily struggles you face, take a moment to appreciate the comforts you have. The fact that you can take a warm bath, eat a meal without fear of contamination, and sleep peacefully without worrying about the dangers of disease or the searing heat of the desert. These are luxuries. The people of ancient Egypt didn't have those luxuries, and yet they survived.